to go over anything in the agenda that people may have any additional comments or questions with, need any clarity prior to the meeting. Also, opportunity to do any counselor reports, liaison reports. And I guess we'll start. Does anyone have any questions about any specific agenda items? Cut and dry this week.
On the 7A, we adopt a policy, but in the attachment, we don't have a plan. So what exactly is the policy?
It was in the document you got. I didn't copy that for you. Is that the pages?
7A.
Yeah. And I didn't copy that big stack that you emailed to you. Maybe that one is on.
Yeah, we got a copy of the policy, the 43-page policy.
So I guess I'm just curious how the lack of a plan relates to the policy.
So you mean the transition plan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the way I understand it is that the ED self-evaluation that we've been doing is almost complete. And Adam's been the one working on this. He's done a great job. I've taken his fantastic work and transmitted it to you. So if you have detailed questions, he's the genius.
Yeah, I would just be
My
interested.
understanding is that we've done a self-evaluation. We've got a number of issues we need to address.
Right.
And we're in the process of putting together the plan for how we're going to address those issues over a period of time. The capital plan does include a substantial amount of money in future years for making ADA improvements.
That's what I was
We've
gonna
identified
ask.
the funding part of it, and now we still need to nail down the actual ADA transition plan.
And that will include kind of like a timetable for
Which
implementation.
projects will be done first and how we're going to phase through.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have any other questions or comments on any of the items on the agenda? Or any reports on any meetings, subcommittee meetings, liaison reports?
I'm gonna participate in a webinar on models for financial strategic planning next week, the mayor and I.
Who's that through?
Massachusetts agency.
Oh, cool. We'll see.
We'll see, I'll report back. Let me see. And I can just say that I hope we can reach some kind of decision on two things this evening. One of which is whether to lease or sell the property. Why don't I ever know the address of that property? It's on the oval. 52, okay. So I would like that for us to be able to reach some kind of decision there. I believe I had resent to you a memo from the corporate counsel regarding the what our options were and the legal ramifications for each option. So that should help inform our decision. And then the other matter I hope we can move forward pretty significantly is the matter of what we're going to do with our snow removal law. So. And I did talk to two directors, one for general services in Albany and one for code enforcement in Cortland regarding how their laws are implemented, and they too exact a fine They don't, Portland doesn't call it a fine, they call it a fee. And I think Counselor Insult suggested ingeniously that assigning it that designation would allow us to sidestep any court involvement that would bog down the process of.
Yeah, but I thought the chief said that that's not gonna fly.
No, I think what he said was that if you were to
Just
cite,
renaming it.
so like give a ticket that had to go through the court system, that would get tossed out.
Right.
But that was the way I understood.
I think that the end of the conversation became a matter of, is this a semantics issue?
Right.
To just rename it from fine to fee doesn't actually take away the fact, doesn't erase the fact that it's a punitive.
Right, but it depends which agency enforces it and is overseeing the process. So just as a building code violation has some, in some cases, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, some kind of penalties, right?
Right.
That they oversee the enforcement of. This would be a similar example.
As long as it's not enforced by the police.
I think as long, that's my understanding.
But that's part of our ability to
Department head.
identify offenders.
Offenders.
Right, and the way in which Cortland does it is to make the code enforcement office entirely responsible for the implementation of the law.
But Portland calls it a fine.
Pardon?
Portland calls it a
They
fine.
they do, but it's not a fine that is managed legally.
Yeah, but it says, any person violating this section of this article shall be guilty of a violation of the code of the city of Portland.
Just like a
And-
hedge person
And
is.
upon conviction, it says, upon conviction shall be punished by the fine prescribed herein.
Yeah,
That's-
well,
that
I mean, the
sounds pretty-
conviction part is legalese, but through my conversation with the code enforcement director, he was very careful to point out that there's no process. It can be appealed. So in other words, they have to take pictures before and after to kind of prove you described to me. So that is the proof that they have to work with in case there is an appeal. They also, I think, have to.
Who do they appeal to?
The office.
The code enforcement office.
Yeah.
So how is this a model for us?
I just think that I'm looking for a model for how something actually can work, is working, and that appears to be the case with Portland. It
So-
appears to be the case with Albany. They have the same number of staff in Portland as ours. And I think it's a matter that they're able to execute that particular job. According to what I hear from the director, is that they, in the aftermath of the storm, completely dedicate their office to that purpose.
For every storm?
Yes, but you have to remember that clear sidewalks that are safe and that allow safe passage is the goal.
No, I don't deny that. Obviously, we want that to happen. I'm just trying to figure out how this is different from what we do in terms of enforcement. So they don't use police to
They don't.
identify.
They don't.
And how many miles of sidewalks do they
They have 41 linear feet compared to our 56 linear miles, I mean. 65. They do have a little bit more technologically sophisticated means of taking complaints that I could get more information about.
Now, they scale up for offenses.
Right.
Our law doesn't do
It
that.
does.
It does, do
Yeah.
that?
Yes.
Did they give you an idea of what kind of revenue they generate from that off?
I didn't ask that question. They also, the other feature that's different is that for clearance of sidewalks, they have to rely upon a third party to keep up with the work. And this was something that the committee and discussions with Joe and Mike, that suggestion came forward because their focus is so is on the streets, and they're unable to get to the sidewalks, you know, in a fashion that would allow for sidewalk clearance, you know. So that's something we might consider, setting out an RFP for a snow removal contractor to deal with violations. Because then you have, if we decide to keep the fine, not only the fine, but also the fee for clearance and the administrative fee for processing that work. But we can, yeah.
Hey, Beth, is this camera?
Yes, because the other one's messed up.
Wow, we have another new
Okay.
view.
Brian gave me a second option.
Option, cool.
So just be careful what you're doing behind yourself.
So are we looking at this would fall solely then on the building inspector's office? Taking it
I'm
away,
just
or-
putting it
Well, I
out
don't know.
there as a model that we could consider. And obviously, we would need to work, you know, have a discussion about how that would work, not only with Joe, but with the mayor. Personally, I'm advocating the retention of the fine or fee or whatever you want to call it, because I honestly believe that that serves as a deterrent, and, you know, the fact that it's a model used in not only Albany, Portland, New York City, Boston.
So basically, the only change that you would be advocating for would be not issuing citations per se, is that it?
Per se. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the language in the law does call it a citation, but it does, the 2015 law does create latitude for deciding what agency will actually enforce the law. It mentions several possibilities, you know. It could be you could be cited by a DPW agent, code enforcement, police, whatever. So perhaps the work that we need to do would be to evaluate what we feel would be the most appropriate agency for enforcement, and then figure out a way to make that work. I mean, I personally don't believe it's the council's job to figure out how to make it work in terms of the actual process and steps. I think that is an administrative decision, but I would like to get a stronger sense of commitment that that will be a priority and that will get done during snow events.
I disagree with you to some extent, Rochelle, that it's not our job to look at the inner workings of it. I think that we do need to work with the building inspectors.
Well, in terms of our
department.
job description by charter, it's not really. I mean, that's the reason I say it. I mean, and that's why we stopped short of delineating that process when we wrote the law. You know, we can get really bogged down as a council if we're figuring out how everybody does their jobs. And we've gotten in trouble before for doing that.
I remember last week, Chief Parkinson saying that his office just couldn't do it.
Right, I mean,
So
and,
we know that for a fact.
right.
We know that he's having or has had extreme difficulty trying to do that part of the law, so. And then someone else had mentioned, maybe Richard, that you can put it on the annual tax assessment.
That's right.
Add it to the assessment. That seemed like a real streamline.
Well, that's in the existing law. If you're unable to collect through direct transmittance of the violation paper, then any unpaid amounts are assigned to the tax assessment bill.
And your reloading becomes they follow the property
That's right.
and not the account.
Well, I mean, and that's another thing in going out, that's another thing that Mr. Knickerbocker said regarding how they approach things in Portland, that they use the tax assessment rolls, and maybe you do that too, so that the citation goes directly to the property owner, right? Not, you could put the notice right on the property, but that does not mean that the property owner will receive it. Nonetheless, that does not exempt the property owner from the responsibility. And then hopefully our communication about the law with a good public relations campaign will further eliminate any excuses people have, you know, so that they can plead ignorance about the law.
Did the Cortland law have a schedule so that, you know, there's an announcement made 24 hours after?
Yes,
this?
they actually have a different schedule. Thank you, Beth, for putting this together. But they have a little bit different schedule, and it, now I'm looking at this big mass of text, but it's something like 4 hour, after 9 p.m. or 9 a.m., you have 4 hours. It seems to be written so that people have a little bit more leeway in terms of when they have to get it done, depending on when the snowstorm ends. Let's see, where is that?
I'm concerned, it sounds like we have, I'm just guessing at the math, maybe 25–30% more sidewalks. And if it's the same staffing in the building inspector's office, setting the building inspector's office up for failure.
Well, it was interesting when you said that they utilize the service of a third-party contractor
To remove snow.
to remove.
That takes the burden off of, that would take the burden off the DPW to try to keep up with the removal.
And it seemed like this is the fee plus, so they would be responsible for a fee plus associated costs with the removal from that third party.
In addition to the fine. Yep.
Now,
Yeah.
how do they go about, I guess my question is this, if you have a absentee landlord, per se, and the, pardon me, the outside hired contractor removes the snow,
Right,
submits a bill,
right.
do they submit the bill to the city of Cortland, do they submit it to the homeowner?
No, they submit it to the homeowner according to what is listed on the tax record.
But then you don't have the ability to include it in taxes
Taxes,
assessment.
exactly.
So they,
Well, no, I'm just
That's the point
saying,
I was getting at.
the address, so that you can reach the property owner.
Right, but
But
I-
there's no ability to
Pay
regain that money
money.
if the landlord doesn't want to pay it.
Right.
They have no recourse.
Well, that becomes a lien then on the property.
by
By
the
whom?
contractor, or, I would just think you would,
I think we would have to pay it ourselves.
yes.
Right.
And then get the reimbursement
That's
through the
right.
assessment, yes.
Mhm.
One thing I would comment on, in terms of staffing, if we're gonna compare Plattsburgh to Cortland, their code enforcement is done all by career firefighters,
That's right.
and it's.
Well, they actually have 2 firefighters and 1 staffer.
Yes, and also, if you look at the 2016 workload of the building inspector of Portland, there were 2 single housing building permits requested. I would venture a guess we had 15 here. They are not involved in many projects that we aren't involved in. What I'm kind of saying is they don't appear to be as busy as our building inspector's
Okay.
office. In terms of development, I think we've, just looking around town, we have several projects right now. They apparently don't have many, having talked to some people who live there. So their code enforcement is also basically part-time, because the firefighters are out doing it.
But they're doing fire inspections as well.
Yes,
The fire department is, or the?
No, the code
Okay.
enforcement office.
who are career firefighters.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, that's fair enough.
So I'm just saying that I think you need to look at the basic function of a building inspector's office of any city and see where they're at with the development. I would imagine just the DRI reatees are going to be busier than, say,
Okay.
the ones that weren't.
Well,
Just
do
a
you
thought.
have a suggestion as to how we can do this by some other means?
In terms of
Yeah.
enforcing agency? Oh, we'll leave that up to the administrators.
Touche.
There we are.
Oh,
I would
boy.
be interested to know their ratio of rentals to owner-occupied housing. Ours is pretty high, and I think it always has to.
Well, I
Or
mean,
even, or
he didn't
even
give me
owners who
those,
are in the area as opposed to.
he didn't
being
give
owners.
me those statistics, but what he did say was that the landlords and the absentee landlords make up the preponderance of violators.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so you wanted the ratio of, I mean, well, it sounds as though I've gotten a smackdown about, it's okay, you know, trying to compare Cortland to us, anyway.
All I'm saying is 2/3 of our properties are rentals, 1/3 are owner-occupied. And we always have to keep that in mind in whatever strategizing we do. It's gonna influence or color the nature of solutions we try to adopt. So because of that, I'd be interested to know what their ratio is.
Okay. Got it. So, anyway. Any other points?
I can certainly talk to our infrastructure division and our public safety division to see what kind of alternatives they have for enforcement. That's probably one thing we're gonna have to figure out together. Coming up with some sort of rational escalated fees, another thing you brought up. When it comes time to actually clean the sidewalks for the offenders, whether it's done in-house or contracted out, a third dimension. It's probably 3 different dimensions we're gonna have to deal with here. I'll start looking into the things I can anyway. And,
Thank you.
meanwhile, keep up your great research on how other communities solve this problem. Obviously, this is a vexing problem and we have
Yeah.
to deal with it in a head-on manner, so.
Yeah, I just worry that, I mean, I totally understand and accept the legitimacy of all questions. I personally don't know if I'm up to the task of finding all the solutions. So I would ask that we can agree that we're gonna try to find a way to have cleaner, safer streets in the winter, and that we can take this on as a project collectively. You know, I'm fine with, you know, I think it's really a good debate and really important to have all of the considerations laid out on the table, but I would like an equal amount of effort to be put forward in terms of how to get a solution.
You know, the problem is, we've been talking about this, and you've given us the history, and it's really hard to find a solution, you know? We've tried to be creative, you know, you had the committee, you had public hearings, and stumped.
Yeah, it's frustrating, but I don't think we should give up.
No.
No.
And thank you, Rochelle.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sorry, Jessica, could you maybe turn off your camera light? I don't think you really need it. It's kind of
Blinding.
blinding. Thank you.
I would
I
just
think that's you, I can't tell.
comment on the New York City snow removal. They have 4 hours to do it. And they're diligent because of the fines.
Yes.
They either take care of it themselves or they pay to have it done. Rarely do you see an unshoveled sidewalk, at least in Harlem, where I'm familiar. If, you know, their sidewalks never have snow. And
Yeah, and
they're
I
all
think the
fearful,
police issue the
fearful of a
tickets.
fine, because
Yeah.
the fine tends, or the fee, I'm not sure what they call it,
Yeah.
a fine or a fee, tends to take care of the problem.
Yeah. If I recall correctly, I believe that's taken care of by the police department.
There was a property owner on Margaret Street who, he had a corner lot. He failed to comply and someone did it for him. I don't know if you guys did it or it was a business, I think. And he had to pay $850 when it was all said and done. I just wondered, has he been a repeat offender? Does anyone know?
The $1,500 one? Yes.
The one I'm talking about was an $850 one. It was a business on Market
Yeah,
Street.
it's a business owner, and yes.
And he's been a repeat offender.
I think it was the old Booyahs. I think it was the old Booyahs, and I don't think it's been a repeat offender. There's another one though that was 12 and change, and yes.
So we find someone $1,200, or we assess someone $1,200 and they fail to comply after that.
Yes.
Man,
And they just pass it off to their renters.
maybe. That's, again, that gets back to that thing. We have so many rental properties, it colors the way we do things. $1,200.
Any other items you'd like to have a little bit of discussion on before we move into regular session?
You're ready.
So I'd like to call this meeting to order for the common, or do we, hold on, we have 3 more minutes. Want to do a sing-along?
Okay.
Okay, take
Sorry
two.
about that, folks. We gotta get our clocks in sync here.
Contact the guy and I'll say they do it for only $600.
Did you have any additional questions on the rather big item for the capital projects?
The living document?
Thanks for
Fluid and dynamic, I think is the term.
Oh, I found it.
Right there in the stand.
Got a good view of Peter's back.
Back, right?
Don't turn around.
I know, when it passes you. It does now. Yes. I was in it for 2 weeks straight. It doesn't make any sense, but I'm not close enough yet.
Peter, I'm thinking about what you said. I'm thinking it's within our rights to make recommendations. I mean, if we collect what amounts to some research about best practices, perfectly up, within our purview to pass that along.
Yes.
It's just that we can't make decisions.
Decisions, right.
Yeah.
I know where you're going, but I
Yeah.
guess the way that you presented it and the way I interpreted it,
It was like,
wait a minute,
yeah, right, right, right. Well, yeah, but there, I mean,
or at least we should be. I mean,
And they're gonna be right down the lane.
To call this meeting to order then of the Common Council, City of Plattsburgh, October 5th, 2017, will be used with the pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mayor Reed?
Present.
Councilor Armstrong?
Here.
Councilor Kelly?
Here.
Councilor Dowdle?
Here.
Councilor Ensel?
Here.
Councilor Casper?
Here.
Councilor Kreutzer?
Here.
Just a few brief comments. First of all, you'll probably hear a little bit more from me next week as well. Two of the councilors volunteered to go down to New York City with me and with our Chamberlain, Richard Marks, and with Paul D. Dominicus to discuss with Moody's our bond status. We're going to keep our fingers crossed and see if we can maybe not move the bond rating up. We'll try. Hopefully we'll succeed in preventing it from falling any further, but we have reason to believe that the city deserves to be moved at least into a neutral category rather than a negative outlook, given all the various things that we're trying to do with the 5-year budgeting and these kinds of things. So that's one of our goals next week, and I'll give you a little bit more of a brief as we prepare our presentation for that date in New York City. I met with some wonderful second graders this morning. They were, about 80 of them were in here. They were a handful, but they were a lot of fun, and that's always one of the most enjoyable parts of the job. Paul D. Dominicus briefed a few councilors earlier today on a proposal we'll be making as part of the Restore New York grants. We hope to vie for $1 million to rehabilitate the MLD site, if that MLD site could become a former MLD site. As you know, we've been looking to find some place for MLD within the city, and having that grant for remediation and preparation for it to be redeveloped would be a big bit of momentum for us to continue moving forward. And MLD's been working very hard with us on possibly citing other locations within the city as well. So hopefully we may have more to report on that. And any day now we expect the contracting for DRI to finally come through. You know, that was about 18 months ago that we received that wonderful gift to the city, and we haven't been permitted quite yet to actually do things. We haven't received the contracts yet. We think they're imminent, and as you can see, it doesn't slow us down from developing things like the historical trail, something we've been talking about for a long time anyway. So I'm sure you'll be hearing next month or two a lot more progress on that. I think things are starting to fall into place. Our sister city on the west side of the Adirondacks, Watertown, just recently received a grant for DRI. It's a DRI city as well, and then working closely with the mayor there to allow him to gain from some of the experiences we've had. So it's all very productive as well. That's all I have to report, unless you have any questions, and we can continue on.
Resolved that the minutes of the regular meeting of the Common Council held on September 28, 2017 are approved and placed on file among the public records of the city clerk's office.
Moved by Councilor Kreutzer and second by Councilor Dowdle. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed.
Resolved that the payrolls of the various departments of the city of Plattsburgh for the week ending October 4th, 2017 in the amount of $105,923.29 are authorized and allowed, and the mayor and the city clerk are hereby empowered and directed to sign warrants drawn on the city chamberlain for the payment thereof.
Moved by Councilor Kelly and second by Councilor Ensel. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed.
Resolved that the reports as listed are hereby ordered, received, and placed on file among the public records of the city clerk's office.
Moved by Councilor Armstrong, second for Councilor Ensel. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed.
Resolved that the bills audited by the Common Council for the week ending October 6, 2017 in the amount of $306,361.17 are authorized and allowed, and the mayor and city clerk are hereby authorized and directed to sign warrants drawn on the city chamberlain for the payment thereof.
Moved by Councilor Dowdle and second by Councilor Kreutzer. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. At this time, it's the first of two opportunities for the public to please come and address the council. This first opportunity is to address issues that are on the agenda tonight. You'll have another opportunity probably about 10 minutes, 15 minutes later to address any items of mutual concern. So please come forward to let us hear your thoughts on anything on the agenda tonight. Seeing none, let's continue, please.
Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore the Common Council adopts City of Plattsburgh Title VI policy and the mayor be authorized to sign it for submission to New York State DOT, the entire text of which has been distributed to and read by the members of the Common Council, and a copy of said policy is made part of the minutes of this meeting.
Moved by Councilor Casper and second by Councilor Armstrong. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilor Armstrong?
Yes.
Councilor Kelly?
Yes.
Councilor Dowdle?
Yes.
Councilor Ensel?
Yes.
Councilor Casper?
Yes.
Councilor Kreitzer?
Yes.
Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore the Common Council approves the City Chamberlain to adjust the 2017 general fund budget by $1,987.63 for the unbudgeted cost of repairing a police vehicle damaged in an auto accident.
Moved by Councilor Armstrong, second by Councilor Kreitzer. Discussion, please. Seeing none, roll call.
Councilor Armstrong?
Yes.
Councilor Kelly?
Yes.
Councilor Dowdle?
Yes.
Councilor Ensel?
Yes.
Councilor Casper?
Yes.
Councilor Kreitzer?
Yes.
Be it resolved by the Common Council of the City of Plattsburgh that the capital expenditure program for 2018 through 2022, the pages of which are hereby made a part of this resolution, aggregating the sum of $42,292,000 no cents, is hereby adopted, subject to the appropriation or appropriations of the necessary funds.
Moved by Councilor Kelly, second by Councilor Ansel. Discussion.
Well, without a lot of fanfare, I'd just like to thank the Infrastructure Committee and Mr. Marks for working so diligently on this, and to thank the members of the council and you, Mayor, for working right alongside them. And this is the first year, in my experience, that we've had an extended discussion about the capital budget and just what we can afford to bond each year, and that was refreshing. And it gave me a clearer picture of what we should be shooting for in the future. And I also think that it would be good to do two things very soon: to put our 5-year capital plan up on the board with all the changes from the budget and the capital budget, and see what that does to our 5-year plan, and see if we need to make any more adjustments going forward, which I'm sure we will. We couldn't anticipate everything that could happen this year. So again, I'd just like to thank all the people that participated in this effort. It was tremendous, and your work is greatly appreciated. Oh, and the second thing that I failed to mention was that in the way that Mr. Marks provides us a quarterly update on finance, I would like to see a quarterly update on capital projects going forward. Would that be too much to ask the Infrastructure Committee to give us an ongoing report quarterly on how these various projects are going?
We kind of discussed that when we were looking at the capital plan, and I don't know, you probably suggested that, that the idea of in progress is pretty nebulous. So if we can get more details about the nature of the process and progress, that would be helpful.
I might add, you asked for how this will be incorporated into the 5-year budget, and we do want to revise that 5-year budget to take down with us to New York City in a week's time. So we will take a first stab in doing that, and obviously it's a fluid and dynamic document that we'll be working on an ongoing basis, but we will take a first stab at that. And another thing I might want to mention too is the group that put this capital plan together and worked with you all on it. They're showing an incredible amount of imagination on how we can work to take care of the needs we have within the constraints we have. I know that there's been discussion on how we can do roads in a different way, not only the major projects, but also the grinding and repaving, and I think you're even discussing a pilot program to try out different ways to do this in cooperation with the county and other municipalities, sharing equipment, doing more in-house. And so I think it's it's wonderful to see the level of creativity that's also coming to bear on this. And I think that I'm pretty confident actually it's going to show some dividends and allowing us to do maybe more, but certainly with a little bit less money than we've had in the past too. So thank you very much. Any other discussion?
Let me just ask, when we hear adjustments and fluid and flexibility, we're talking surprises, are we not? As surprises come up, this is going to probably bounce all over the place, correct?
Well, you know, the 5-year plan is a plan, and you revise the 5-year plan every single year. So I think it incorporates that we reprioritize. Hopefully, and we had this discussion just before the meeting, hopefully we can find the capacity to put more into the capital plan over the years. We recognize that we really need to, first of all, get ahead of and then stay ahead of the capital improvement needs. And I'm speaking primarily here of general fund and roads, obviously. But we have to constantly reevaluate, see what our resources are. Trade off not only the quality of the road, but the amount of traffic on it, and come up with a formula. There isn't a formula internally, but things change, and something that appears to not be a big problem now could be easily a big problem just 1 year from now. So it has to be a little bit flexible.
Well, and I think that the use of that term to just apply to what has been devised now is incorrect. That's always the way in which a capital plan is functioned. It's all over the place. There are surprises.
Priorities change.
Yeah, that's right.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Dowdle?
Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor Casper?
Yes.
Counselor Kretzer?
Yes.
I believe there's no travel requests or resolutions for initial consideration at this time, unless anyone would like to bring one up. If not, this is the time for new business and council reports. Any councilors like to bring up any council liaison reports or any new business, please? I might mention we did have extensive discussion in the work session on the snow removal policy and sidewalks. I think it's in the forefront of all of our minds. I have volunteered to do some work with the various department heads to see if we can address some of your concerns. But let's keep that on the forefront so we don't go through another year in kind of that area where we don't know whether we're enforcing or not enforcing. So.
Thank you.
Seeing no further comments or reports, this is the opportunity for the public to please come up and address the council. This time, please address the council on any issue of mutual concern. Very quiet crowd tonight. I hope that's severe satisfaction rather than dissatisfaction. Sometimes you never know.
Could be numbness.
Yeah. Seeing none, then, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Councilor Armstrong, second by Councilor Dowdle. Roll call.
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Dowdle?
Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor Casper?
Yes.
Counselor Kretzer?
Yes.
Thank you all, folks.
So I hope you're willing to stay for a little bit of an extended work session. As I said, the two matters. I guess it makes sense to just follow up on the snow removal, and maybe we could.
He was supposed to stay.
Who? Dean.
What do you need before?
For the
Right? We were gonna have that
52,
discussion with him
the
present.
number 52.
Yeah, would you mind? I didn't ask him. Sorry. Right.
Sure.
Thank you.
What do you mean?
Well, you wanted to know about the property or the snow removal?
I'm
deems advised.
The property.
The what?
The property.
The property,
Just to
let's
be
do
able to
that.
clarify.
Yep.
Because I think your latest email that you sent was pretty clear.
We're talking
Yeah.
Chaplain's house?
51 Oval.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen,
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind, we're just trying to do some work up here and just need a little more decorum, sorry. Sure.
So the two possibilities were the leasing and the selling.
Right.
Subset of leasing is for more than 5,000 a year or longer than
Right.
3 years, which breaks apart the notice requirement.
And from what I remember, the selling was far more complicated.
Selling requires subdivision of the property and then just the process to sell. So the complication was not the process of selling.
Hey, hang on a second. You guys, could please, could we ask? I know you gotta go do your postmortem anyway. Goodbye.
So the complication was based on the property itself because it's, right now it's connected to the rec center. So we'd have to subdivide it, and there's potential variances and things
Right.
associated with that subdivision.
In either case, you have to go public.
Right.
Yes. Yep.
So the better move is that, in your opinion, and I know you just offer the facts, is the leasing.
Is the what? Leasing?
I don't want to
think he was
qualify it. Yeah, I don't want to
arguing
qualify it. Oh, I mean, it's an option.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's an option.
It's a more immediate option.
It's a less
It doesn't
complicated
require
option.
subdivision, yeah.
So,
And
Less than-
4,800 or
Fi-
$5,000.
That's under our code and under state law. If it's over 5,000 or for longer than 3 years, the 5,000 a year or longer than 3 years requires a more formal notification process.
right,
Less than that
Okay.
still requires notification, but just less formal.
right. And that averages out under 5,000.
420 a month, 416 a month.
Which is consistent with what the previously C paid. And that, part of that determination was based on the exorbitant energy costs connected to a really inefficient building.
I guess for me, what I need to know from someone is, what is to the best, greatest advantage for the city? That's what I need to know.
Something, because right now it's sitting vacant. So to me, the more immediate resolution would be to lease it.
Okay,
But that's not the long-term answer, I can't say. I mean, as landlord, you have responsibilities as well.
right.
So maybe it's the best is to get rid of it.
What are our responsibilities as landlord?
As landlord, in general, you need to provide a habitable structure, so heat, water, no vermin, and
Right.
things like that.
I guess my inclination after reading your email was to lean towards leasing. That was my feeling. I don't know about anybody else.
I agree.
Wouldn't,
If
There
at some
also
point the
needed to be
lessee wanted to buy the
updates
property,
to
would
the
that be a
property for leasing,
possibility?
correct?
That was what the request was, and to me, you have a cart and horse issue, because in order to do a valid right of first refusal or rent to own, you've already established the purchase price. So it's, in
Okay.
theory, sure, but in practicality, I don't know how you get around all of the other code requirements by establishing the purchase price and, you know, basically locking it in as a purchase, because that's what that would be
And
doing.
does that also mean that at the point at which you would have a purchase, you would have to go public again, right? Because you just had a lease, and now.
Yeah, I mean, it just overly complicates it, because right now it's city property. In order to sell it, you have to deem it as surplus property. I'm not gonna quote section 241, but you have to deem it surplus and go through a process to get the best value for the property. So it hasn't been, that's what I'm saying, cart and horse, because if you're leasing it, fine, it's city property, you don't have to deem it surplus, because you're the landlord.
And aren't there some renovations or improvements that are being asked before?
No,
They're almost
Prior
all
to the-
offered by the individual, not asked for by the individual.
Right.
And that individual is, I don't wanna say being presumptive, but it's presumptive to say that that would be the tenant, because we haven't gone through the process yet. And that's upsetting to him. I mean, there was an email directly to me saying that wasn't a process that was followed previously. I can't speak to that, but all I can say is what the code says and how we would apply it.
And you mentioned advertisement, I think.
Yep,
What
so-
form does the advertisement have to take?
Again, the first decision is how much are we charging, that determines what form the advertising takes.
So if it's under the 5,000 in the 3-year window,
Yep.
what's the process, the notification process? then?
Published in the paper,
3
general
years,
lease
so-
terms, or notification of potentially interested parties. Again, we're trying to quote the code. And some other public notice, yeah.
And if you bumped it up to the next level of lease agreements?
Then it's more like an RFP. I mean, then
Oh,
it's
okay.
actual lease terms.
Okay.
It's just more formal.
Okay, and the present rent, or what it was renting for?
I believe it's $400 a month, I believe.
I recall
We got the
actually,
rental
Maybe it was
agreement.
higher.
at one time, 800 a month, but I could be
Okay.
wrong.
I haven't
I think
seen
that was the
lease yet.
beginning of the
The
lease, I don't know
most
if it was.
recent was in the neighborhood of 400. I don't have the lease.
Yeah,
So-
it
so
sounds
if-
like the goal back then was to keep it under the $5,000.
Yeah, I don't remember that discussion about,
And there's a chance that this process wasn't followed closely in the past.
right? Okay. So what do we need to do if we want to proceed with the?
You just need to make the decision of generally are under that threshold. If you are, then advise Sylvia, she'll notice it, and then go from there.
Okay.
And then whatever results we get, bring it back to you, or,
Is that what we want to do?
Yeah, let's
Okay.
move.
Do we need to vote on this?
Sure.
you need to vote on
At a
the.
meeting, right?
The code isn't that helpful to that respect. You need to vote on the actual awarding of the bid. You need to ensure that that process has been followed.
Okay.
So I think informally, if the liaison to Sylvia wants to say, hey, go forward with this, she'll work with me and we'll put it out there and see what we
Is
get.
that you, Peter?
For the rec center?
No, for the
Yeah,
With
Sylvia's
Sylvia,
liaison.
yes, yeah,
Yes.
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 Yep.
Right, so do we have consensus?
Yes.
That we're gonna lease?
Right, lease.
Okay. But do we have to decide on the 5,000 or under?
I think you just did.
You
Yes,
did,
we
okay,
did.
we did, okay.
Yep,
All right, thank you.
Okay, good.
okay. Good.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you very much, Dean.
Go to the feedings.
So, I appreciate your questions, totally validate their worth. Just want to know where to go from here and how to proceed.
Snow?
We're on snow.
We're on
removal.
snow.
You know, the mayor said something in our previous discussion. He said that, well, this is a multifaceted task. You know, there's enforcement, there's snow removal, and then there's getting somebody to pay for it. There may be other aspects. I thought, wow, committee, we need a committee. A committee of counselors, one who
Okay.
will handle the enforcement part of it, one who will handle the mechanics for snow removal, working with department heads, of course, and then one who will work on how to figure out how to pay for it. Is
Well, I
that-
think, what about the liaisons for each of those departments that it would involve?
Well, that comes to mind, for sure.
But do we, in order to do that, I'd like to just clarify, are we looking at retaining the existing law and figuring out how to enforce that law? Or are we going back to the drawing board?
No.
Good, I like that note,
What did
but
he
what
say?
about anybody else? Are we keeping the 2015 law, but just figuring out how to implement it better?
But that goes back to your point that it's not our job to implement or administrate a policy or code.
I like that too.
Is it,
Make it work, administration.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was the way the code was written to begin with. There were all these options that were laid out as possible mechanisms, but it was up to administration to figure it out.
is it possible to tweak that 2015 law and change parts of
And
it?
adjust the fees and
Okay,
fine
what,
structure? Or-
what fees do you want?
Sorry,
I
I didn't
mean,
mean
you know,
to
do you have
use
any
that word.
specific recommendations?
Well, I just remember what Chief Parkinson said about his office can't, they can't handle the fine part of it.
There's
And they didn't
not-
want to do that, and they didn't feel like it would work, so,
But it's not stated in the law that the police would be the agency to implement it, so there's latitude there.
okay. But is it a fine or is it a fee? I know that sounds
I'd say,
trivial,
well,
but
I
it is,
mean-
it's
Well,
an important
I don't know.
question.
The fine, I think, was based upon your innocent until proven guilty. And that's where the fine would come into place. A fee seems to be have a little more discretion.
But then the fine could be applied if we use the model that they use at Cortland, where there's the before and after pictures.
But but then the question remains, do we have the staff
Yeah, exactly.
in order to carry out that operation? So, but I mean, I think it would be an easy fix to call it a fee, a penalty instead of a fine. I don't know, is penalty in terms of legalese, is that the same as a fine?
What about if we just hiked the administrative fees? Because essentially, that's what it is. It's
But
part of
then
the
that
administrative fee.
But see, the reason that Dale and I decided on using the fine was that you only get the administrative fee and the fee for clearing it if that operation is done. And the fee, fine, whatever you want to call it, is applied to all offenders.
So, example, 5 days later, you could go out to, and then nature's taking its course.
Right.
But for 5 days, you had an
It's sad.
impassable, right.
I think that the law, I think you did a good job on it. God, we talked about this so much. And you did a good job of it. No, it's not that I'm sick of it, it's just that we have city workers who are being very creative in trying to address multiple issues. And since this is really an issue of enforcement, I can't see anything in the law that could be improved. I just can't. And if in fact we can just let it be a fine without getting in trouble based on, I want clarification from the chief on that. Let's let them figure it out.
Okay.
You know?
But to send a clear expectation from the council
Yes.
that it is our objective and our priority to have clean, safe streets in the winter. I mean, I think that that's the purpose of the law. And if we're endorsing that law, then it's up to the city administration to make sure it's enforced.
Right. And I think your point is well taken about communication with the city.
Right.
It's something I've said before about multiple issues, that sometimes you feel like when people move into the city, you need to send them a pamphlet. Welcome to the city of Plattsburgh. This is what it means to live in a city and not in the countryside. And you can't park on your lawn, and you need to cover your trash, and, you know, just to,
Can't
you
have
know.
burn barrels.
Right, right. I mean, really, to communicate.
Honestly.
We need to communicate with people that there is this law.
More than
Right.
50 cats.
Well,
the most transient population for that is obviously the renters. And what Burlington does is they have an inspection of a rental unit each time there's a turnover. And there's actually an inspection fee and an information exchange. They're then in a database, so everybody knows exactly where everybody is renting at a given time. And that fee actually pays for the additional inspectors to be taking care of some of the things that you're discussing tonight.
right.
That sounds great. We don't have the capacity to do that, I don't think.
Not in-house, but if we generate revenue from an inspection fee, we may be able to, at least, I can try to explore that model a little bit more anyway and see if it's truly self-sustaining.
I compare this to the hedge law, and as far as I can tell, the hedge law has been very successful. We've watched Joe and his department work on it diligently every year, so that list of offenders of the hedge law gets smaller every year, and that's pretty much what we're hoping for with this law. So
Absolutely.
maybe something can be learned from the hedge law that can apply to this.
You know,
this
Mike,
law.
you mentioned the multifaceted nature of this, and I want to throw another facet into that multi-pot, and that is the condition of sidewalks. My sidewalk in front of my house, you could probably find me every single day of the winter, because it dips so significantly that if there's any sun and snow melts, overnight it freezes. So I am out there every single morning trying to scrape away the ice, and then it snows and it melts, and I know a lot of people have that same problem.
According to the law, you're not responsible if it ices over, as long as
I
you
put
throw
cover,
something out there on it.
which I do, but then it becomes a muddy mess when it melts, and it just starts getting thicker and thicker and thicker. So those are kinds of conditions that we have to be aware of.
Well,
too.
yeah.
That reminds me of our discussion a while back of sidewalk assessments in
Yeah.
the city of Ithaca. You remember that one?
Yep.
Embellishment.
I don't know if it's maybe time to resurrect that discussion, but
It was an issue of the taxes.
Expanding the tax
And
base
calling a
beyond.
tax something else, right?
Yeah.
well, and having nonprofits kick in some of the finance for
Right,
Right.
right.
some of those things. That was the big advantage to that procedure.
I would really like to see that discussion move forward, but back to the snow removal. I think that as long as we are in consensus about handing this over to the mayor and his staff, that we can also begin to think about and provide recommendations for a public relations campaign. I've got a whole list of suggestions that I can offer, and I'll circulate those amongst you guys. And as I said last week, Sandra Geddes had already published a little flyer or something that can be turned into a pamphlet or whatever. Albany actually does have a brochure that, in addition to laying out the expectations for maintenance of sidewalks during the winter, talks about all kinds of things like garbage and grass and all kinds of, ways in which you need to be a good citizen
Yeah,
and be
be a
in
good neighbor.
compliance.
Yep.
So we might consider that.
Well, we have a good website now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another tool. So, well, thank you, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Michelle.
Thanks for all your questions
Fighting the
and
fight.
your clarity.
As muddy as it was.
Okay, I'll be in touch with you about it. Okay.
And if you like, I'll invite you to a working meeting.